On this Monday night, Israeli ground forces push deeper into Gaza. While the UN is closing 4 centers in Gaza distributing aid, as Israel's prime minister rejects calls for a ceasefire.
We have to win this war.
Protecting Palestinian civilians.
Your average Israeli cannot distinguish between Palestinian terrorists and terrorized Palestinians.
The Israeli rabbi trying to stop attacks by Jewish settlers. A mob storms a Russian airport searching for Jewish passengers. Deepening concerns about a rise in anti-Semitism. And not so fast, an embarrassing measuring problem that voided a world record at the PanAm Games.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. For a 4th night, Israeli forces are advancing deeper into Gaza. Tanks, infantry and artillery advancing into residential areas in Gaza's north. And Israel's prime minister vows it will not stop. Gaza's health ministry says at least 8,300 people have now been killed. This female soldier, Israel's defense force says, was rescued Sunday night in Gaza. She was one of the hostages taken by Hamas during its rampage into southern Israeli towns on October 7th. She is, the army says, doing well and reunited with her family. More than 200 other hostages remain in the hands of Hamas. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is dismissing all calls for an end to his military campaign.
Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
Our coverage tonight begins with Mike Armstrong and a warning some of the images in his story may be disturbing.
It is a two-pronged push. These are images released by Israeli Defense Forces. It says shot Monday from inside Gaza. The strategy, according to a spokesman, is to move in by ground to engage and identify Hamas fighters and then to attack from the air. Integrated attacks killed dozens of terrorists, the spokesman says. They had barricaded themselves in buildings and were attacking Israeli troops moving towards them. Now, the bombings have day by day become increasingly intense. The IDF says over the last 24 hours, it has hit more than 600 targets.
All the people here look.
Now, this is what that sometimes looks like. This is video shot by a freelance journalist working with Global News in Gaza. It's on a road people are using to move south and was taken just moments after an explosion knocked him off his feet.
Oh, people are evacuating. No safe places.
Now, in the same area, another video shot by an eyewitness appears to show a car meeting a tank, turning around, and then being shelled. The date it took place has not been independently verified. The Israeli government insists it is minimizing civilian casualties, but admits they're happening.
Israel's fight is your fight.
The Israeli prime minister met foreign journalists for just the second time since October 7th. His message to the international community was that this war will be won, he said, with what he called moral clarity.
It means making a moral distinction between the deliberate murder of the innocent and the unintentional casualties that accompany every legitimate war, even the most just war.
Well, there have been warnings from the UN that Israel may be responding to Hamas war crimes with its own. The desperation in Gaza is worsening. Sunday, an aid warehouse was broken into by Gaza residents who took flour and other items. UN officials said Monday they're shutting down 4 aid distribution centers and a storage facility due to a breakdown of civil order. There is also a new video released by Hamas of 3 hostages. Global News has decided not to air it, as it may have been made under duress. But the woman who speaks in the video is very critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, among other things, that he failed to protect them. Netanyahu calls the video cruel psychological propaganda, but one of the hostages' families says they're just happy to see their loved one alive. Donna?
Mike Armstrong in Jerusalem. Thanks, Mike. The violence is not restricted to Gaza. At least 4 Palestinians were killed in the Israeli-occupied West Bank today. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. They were killed during an early morning Israeli raid on Jenin. Israel claims it found explosive devices during those raids. The Palestinian Health Ministry says nearly 120 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. It is on the West Bank of the Jordan River. It's bordered by Jordan, the Dead Sea, and Israel. Israel took control of it in 1967, and Palestinians consider it illegally occupied land. Of the estimated 3.2 million people living there, more than 700,000 are Jewish Israelis, known as settlers. Israel allowed them to move in, though Palestinians, the UN, and most of the international community consider their settlements illegal. The settlements have grown, and settlers continue to build barriers between them and their Palestinian neighbors. The tensions flare up every day. Our Daniele Hamamdjian recently visited the West Bank, and a warning: some of the details in her story are disturbing. Danielle.
Donna, there are now fears the West Bank is at a boiling point and could become another front in a wider conflict. Even the White House, a staunch ally of Israel, has urged Benjamin Netanyahu to, quote, rein in extremist settlers. The stillness of this landscape can be deceiving. The West Bank is not under bombardment, but it is under Israeli occupation. And Israeli settlements, though a violation of international law, have only expanded, and the violence only getting worse. Shootings, beatings, homes torched, cars torched, theft, attacks by Israeli settlers against Palestinians here in the West Bank have increased dramatically in the past year, even more so in the past 3 weeks. On a morning drive through the village of Taibe, we stumble upon a family who's just been attacked. We would defend ourselves with weapons if we could, says Mohammed, but we don't have any. He says Israeli settlers stormed his house, sprayed tear gas on his daughter, began shooting, and then left with 100 sheep worth at least $50,000 US. The first responder on the scene, and who some might see as an unlikely ally, is Rabbi Arik Asherman. He's been working with human rights groups for decades, documenting injustices against Palestinians.
We are all in pain. We are terribly angry. I've never seen anything like this. All the doors are closed right now. Your average Israeli cannot distinguish between Palestinian terrorists and terrorized Palestinians.
He had blue eyes and a beard. Mohammed had never seen him before.
They shoot live bullets. They're all armed, like the civilian. They're not army though. They come civilian. They have their arms. Anybody moved, anybody say no to them, they try to kill people.
Recently, in the span of a few hours, 4 Palestinians were killed, shot by settlers and Israeli soldiers, according to Palestinian authorities. The next day, during their funeral procession, more live rounds were fired at Palestinians, killing a father and son.
This is just our land. It's just that simple. This is our land.
Yishai Fleischer is a settler spokesperson in the West Bank city of Hebron who sees no contradiction in his beliefs. Fleischer says he doesn't condone the attacks on Palestinians, but that the Jewish people can't be expected to be passive. And is your goal to drive the Palestinians on what you call your land out?
Only jihadis. I got a problem with jihadis. I have no problem with the Arabs or Palestinians. I have no problem with that. People who respect my law. This is a tribal region. Arabs that want to live within our tribal lands just have to respect our laws. That's the way of the Middle East.
Palestinian officials say the past 3 weeks have been the bloodiest in the West Bank in the last 15 years. Critics have long complained about a culture of impunity against extremist settlers, and human rights organizations say criminal charges against them are extremely rare. Donna.
Danielle, thanks. Russian police have arrested dozens of people after a mob stormed an airport looking for Jewish passengers. It happened in the southern Russian Republic of Dagestan, which has a majority Muslim population. The mob even made it onto the tarmac looking for people who had just arrived from Tel Aviv. Redmond Shannon on the worrying rise in anti-Semitism.
Like a scene from a century ago. but filmed on smartphones. Hundreds of people stormed Dagestan's main airport, shouting anti-Semitic slogans, looking for Jews. Many make it to the tarmac, running to a plane that arrived from Israel. Crew members order passengers back into the cabin. Outside the terminal, others surround a passenger, checking his passport to see where he's from. Dagestan's health ministry says 20 people were injured, although it's unclear who they were. Dagestan is a semi-autonomous Muslim-majority republic in Russia's North Caucasus. In another part of that region, a Jewish centre under construction was set on fire over the weekend.
Isn't this something that our grandparents told us stories about, with hundreds of people running around looking for the Jews to harm?
Renan Levine says it's particularly difficult to watch because so many North American Jews have roots in the former Russian Empire, where attacks against Jews were common in the 1800s.
Historically, Jews have lived in the region for a very, 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 very long time.
Caucasus expert Harold Chambers says pro-Palestinian rallies had been banned before Sunday's riot.
There's still, frankly, a lot of questions up in the air as to how everything was allowed to get as bad as it was. The fact that the police didn't really intervene is a serious issue.
Police later made 60 arrests. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Ukraine and the West played a role in organizing the mob, something Kyiv denies. The Russian leader has also blamed the West for the current conflict in Israel and Gaza, and he invited Hamas leaders to Moscow last week. That and the events in Dagestan have caused concern in Israel that the world's largest country could be drifting toward a new outlook on the Middle East. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister has called for humanitarian pauses in Israel's war on Hamas to allow foreign nationals and hostages to leave and allow food, fuel and water into the region. In a foreign policy speech today, Melanie Joly said global security is fracturing. Mackenzie Gray on what else she said and the pressure on Israel's allies.
A new Canadian position on the Israeli-Hamas conflict.
400 Canadians are trapped in Gaza. They are living in fear and despair. And as a government, we have a duty to bring them to safety. And that is why we need humanitarian pauses, a humanitarian truce in Gaza.
A humanitarian truce received overwhelming support in a non-binding motion at the United Nations General Assembly Friday. Canada abstained from that vote, which called for an immediate and sustained cessation of hostilities. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister still believes those hostilities were justified on the Israeli side.
Israel has a right to defend itself against terrorist attacks. It has an obligation to do so in accordance with international law.
Those laws violated by Hamas after taking over 200 hostages.
These kids, they want to go home and play Xbox.
Aaron Broderick from Toronto is hoping the Canadian government will help get his 4 family members taken by Hamas out of Gaza.
It's about the result. And the result is bringing them home. And every day they're not home is, in my mind, a failure.
Similar pressure on the federal government from pro-Palestinian protesters calling for a ceasefire and for more aid to be allowed into Gaza.
Ceasefire now!
A message taken directly to Liberal MPs' offices across the country.
We want a ceasefire because we want to see an end to this genocide, and an end, frankly, to innocent civilians being targeted from all sides.
The divide over the conflict also felt in the Liberal caucus.
I don't think Israel has any choice now but to respond to try to deal with the terrorist threat at its border. That being said, we want all civilian life protected as much as possible.
But 23 of Anthony Housefather's Liberal colleagues have taken a different stance, writing to Justin Trudeau directly to call for a ceasefire.
I am fearful about the safety and security of my staff, constituent staff, as well as my family.
Caucus divisions and consistent protests in Liberal ridings pose a major political risk to the Prime Minister, Donna, who already finds himself 14 points down to the Conservatives in the polls.
Thanks, Mackenzie. More than 2 years after the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, Canada says it has met its promised target of Afghan refugees. The government says it successfully resettled 40,000 Afghans since August of 2021. Many of them include Afghan nationals and their families who help Canadian agencies on the ground. It includes vulnerable groups targeted by the Taliban, women, journalists, and LGBTQ2 people. Students take to the streets to protest tuition hikes. Coming up, calls for the Quebec government to cancel its controversial plan. A tentative deal has been reached between Unifor and Stellantis, ending a brief strike at the automaker. More than 8,000 employees walked off the job at midnight. The union and the company negotiated through the night, reaching an agreement in less than 8 hours. No details have been released, but Unifor had been pushing Stellantis to agree to the same core terms the union reached with the other big automakers. And cargo is back on the move on the St. Lawrence Seaway. Management and Unifor reached a tentative deal Sunday in a week-long strike that shut down the busy shipping corridor. Among the sticking points were better wages and improved working conditions.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, tuition hikes have got to go.
In Montreal, hundreds of university students took to the streets to protest the Quebec government's plan to double tuition for out-of-province students. It would start next September, and tuition would nearly double, going up to about $17,000 a year. Protesters fear it sends a message Anglophone students aren't welcome. The provincial government says the measure will help protect the French language. Still ahead, I speak with a former Israeli prime minister about whether anyone is talking about peace after Israel's war. Israel has said it intends to annihilate Hamas. If that is possible, no one is talking about what comes next. Earlier today, I spoke with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak about that. He is the country's most decorated military officer and former chief of staff of the army and a special forces commando before entering politics. Ehud Barak, thank you for speaking with us today. We know the operational objective of the Israeli military and the government is to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas and end its control of Gaza. Do you believe that is possible?
It's possible for sure, but it cannot go without toil and sweat and tears and blood. It might take many weeks, probably months. I hope not a year.
More than 200 people are being held by Hamas in Gaza. 5 of them are now out. Do you believe the rest of them can be rescued in this ground incursion and bombardment, or is it just as likely as possible they could be killed by it?
If there was any real readiness to make a deal, we probably will be ready to do it immediately. But once there is no real proposal on the table, and as long there is no real proposal on the table, it's better for us to penetrate deeper and deeper into Gaza Strip. That will create the kind of pressure that will promote the possibility of a deal about the hostages. It also creates, as we learn now, an opportunity to sometimes to rescue one of them. But I am fully aware of the fact that there is also a risk.
Do you think that there is a risk that the longer this goes on, and as you say, you believe it could be months, Israel will lose support from the rest of the world?
Yeah, for sure. We know it from our experience. We're gradually losing the support. We're gradually losing even in some minds the legitimacy. But we have to remind ourselves and the world, no country on earth would have allowed a Daesh or Al-Qaeda-like kind of terrorists that are executed those crimes against humanity to live on its border. We failed on a grand scale providing this on 7th of October. We are not going to let it happen again.
Before October the 7th, I know you were a harsh critic of Benjamin Netanyahu. You feared he was turning Israel into a de facto dictatorship. Do you think he is the person who should be leading the country at this most difficult time in its history?
Not just Netanyahu. Our armed forces lost the trust of the people on 7th of October, and the Prime Minister lost the trust of the people on 7th of October. Polls which are running right now tells that 80% of the population in Israel, including majority of his own voters, sees Netanyahu as the main responsible for this blow that Israel suffered. Many people have heavy doubts about whether it's reasonable to let the same person who is responsible for the blunder to lead us out of it.
You know better than anyone else that there is never really a military solution to the violence in Gaza, that there has to be a political solution. Who in Israel is looking beyond this military phase, and is there a partner for peace on the Palestinian side?
First of all, I think that even within our war cabinet, I hope and believe that they are discussing the issue because it should be taken into account. In Israel, there is a heavy dispute about what should be the vision. People like me, and I believe about half of the country, believe that the only viable vision is the two-state solution. If you ask me about today, Netanyahu and the two racist Messianic people with him, there's a kind of party of nuts. As long as they are together in the government, they have different vision. They want one-state solution, which is wrong, even a tragedy, but they are in power now. So it's clear that when it is all over, as you mentioned, the longer term, I'm confident that the time will be found, first of all, to solve the debate within ourselves, and then to move forward toward a better future for all.
Well, it's good to end on a note of optimism. Ehud Barak, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Next, why the PanAm Games had to walk back what seemed to be a record-breaking performance. At the PanAm Games in Chile, things didn't quite go right in the women's 20-kilometer race walk. Peru's Kimberly Garcia won gold and thought she had shattered the world record by more than 10 minutes. It turned out she hadn't. After the race, officials discovered the course had not been measured properly and was about 3 kilometers short. It's not clear how exactly that happened. The top 3 finishers do get to keep their medals, but all athletes miss out on ranking points to qualify for next year's Paris Olympics. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Arden, Ontario. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.